Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Soybeans are found on dinner tables around the world. Some form of the soybean is found in baby foods, snacks, cooking oils, and many other food items eaten daily. And soybeans provide the protein in the diets for livestock and fish. The Nebraska soybean farmers support research to develop new soy-based products for foods, livestock, and industrial uses through their checkoff dollars. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Market Journal, television for making agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. This week we're reporting from the Triumph of Agriculture Expo at the CenturyLink Center in Omaha. Well regarded as one of the largest indoor farm shows in the Midwest, the 2012 Triumph of Ag Expo features over 1,000 exhibits ranging from ag manufacturers to suppliers. 2012 marked the 46th anniversary of the show. On this week's episode of Market Journal, we'll take a look at the emergence of online auction sites, look at safety concerns on the farm, and Kurtis will report on farm grants from the USDA. Our marketing analyst this week is Darin Newsom from DTN. We talked to Darin here on Thursday morning. You presented today on the potential for an end in the demand market in grains at a time, mind you, when there's a growing population, there's a push for renewable fuels, so why must you rain on this parade, Darin?
Because somebody has to. And it's actually a question I get asked frequently. You know, reporters from both coasts, even some from the interior, wanting to know if this demand market, this incredibly strong ag industry, ag business cycle that we've seen over the last 5-6 years is going to come to an end. There are a lot of predictions that that's going to happen. That when we get to the end of 2012, that's going to be the end of this strong cycle that we've seen in agriculture. I'm not convinced, but we wanted to lay out the argument, both pro and con, why that's being made.
So why are some of the concerns there? What are some of the things that make people think that it is ending?
The biggest reason, can't go all the way back just to the the annual forum from USDA here last week or so, but more so that the market is high priced and that it just cannot sustain itself, that we're seeing some sort of ag bubble exist, and that if corn starts to break, and corn probably, and their argument is corn needs to break to make other industries stronger, then you're going to see the other grains start to move lower. You're going to see all of the industries tied to corn start to come down. A lot of talk that ethanol isn't going to be able to maintain itself with the end of its subsidy situation, that renewable fuels is certainly going to come up for argument, debate. So all of these things are tying together, saying this is going to be the year that this thing comes to an end.
Let's talk a little bit more about ethanol, because we watched the expiration of the blender's credits in late December. How confident are you now that this industry can not only survive, because survival is one thing, but is it able to thrive?
Two different questions, great questions. Number one, it will survive. Right now it looks like it certainly is going to survive with the situation that we have now. Thriving is going to be more difficult because we're seeing overall gasoline demand coming down. We haven't met the type of demand that we saw in late 2007, early 2008, ever since the economic bust happened in 2008 through early 2009. Gasoline demand has not come back, and there's a few different reasons for that. More fuel-efficient cars, less driving, and we're still dealing with an unemployment situation here in the United States. So all of these have reduced total gasoline demand, and that means not as much actual demand for ethanol, meaning not as much demand for corn from ethanol. So thriving could be difficult if we don't see the overall gasoline demand start to go back up. Surviving, I think it's strong enough to do that without the blender's credit.
Let's attack that growing population. How can we say that there might be a threat to demand if we're still seeing a massive population increase by 2050, 2025?
I don't see that argument at all. They make it saying that we just can't sustain this type of demand growth. You know, we look at the demand charts. We showed them in the seminar today, both domestic and globally. Corn demand just continues to go up year to year. It doesn't matter what the global economy does. We're seeing very strong demand growth, and there's really no reason outside of an anomaly, outside of some sort of chaos effect event, some butterfly event, that we would expect demand to start coming down. It's just too strong, and population's going up, demand's going up.
So what are some of the keys to look at if demand would be ending? You mentioned today investment interest, you mentioned future spreads to look at.
Right.
What are some things there to key off of?
Well, again, it all comes back to my way of looking at the markets, and that's through its structure and the two sides you just mentioned. What are the investors doing? Is there reason for the investors to start moving to something else? We're seeing the dollar starting to change. It's not as weak as it was in past years, so that's going to start pulling some money out of commodities because the fear of inflation is gone. We also have investors coming in on the idea of tightening supply and demand. Unfortunately, for the markets themselves, the strength of the markets themselves, since since early 2011, that money has been coming. It's been coming out faster than it's been going in. So certainly that is a concern that they don't return the same size that they've been in the past. Fundamentally, yes, if we want to look for some signs coming along the road, we have to keep an eye on the future spreads or the price relationship between these different contracts. That'll be a key. That and the basis, the difference between cash and futures, as to when the commercial side is also giving up on this market and demand, the overall demand situation could be starting to slow.
You said today you're confident in the demand market through August. If it would falter, when do we start to see that price come into play?
That could actually start occurring, say, mid-June, mid-July through August, when we get that tipping point where we're starting to focus more on what is expected to be an enormous, a record-sized corn crop this year. Plantings of 94 to 95 million acres, possibility of 164 bushels per acre. When we turn our focus to that and not the tight old crop situation, the tight supplies domestically and globally, that's when this top, at least this short-term top, could occur.
I want to ask you a quick question on soybeans.
Yes.
How closely is that demand tied to China?
Very closely. Demand, China is the demand that everyone's fighting for. And this year, with reduced production in both Brazil and Argentina and other parts of South America, more of that's going to come to the United States. So the focus will almost be entirely on Chinese demand.
As we look at the two evils, potential evils or potential downturns in the market, one being demand, the other being a potential collapse in Europe, which may be staved off for X number of months now. Which of those two is a greater threat?
The economic situation in Europe is a threat, but let's go back to what we said just a few minutes ago, that both corn and soybeans have seen global demand going up despite some of the problems going on in Europe. So yes, we're going to keep a close eye because of the effects, the ripple effects that could have on global banking. I think that's where the real threat in Europe lies. As far as China goes, if it were to say, our demand's going down, we're going to go somewhere else to get our beans, we're going to change our protein source, that's the real threat. I don't see it as a real threat right now, but it certainly is a potential threat out there.
Next week, Mike Briggs will be with us to take a look at the cattle markets. Last week, we discussed crop insurance options for 2012. This week, the National Crop Insurance Service, or NCIS, says total indemnities paid to farmers and ranchers is the highest ever at $10.08 billion. The NCIS says that number is expected to increase as an estimated 5% of claims are still outstanding. The new record is 16% higher than the previously established mark made in 2008. According to the Nebraska Field Office of the National Agricultural Statistics Service, the number of farms and ranches in the state declined less than 1% in 2011. The number of farms and ranches in Nebraska with less than $100,000 in agricultural sales declined by 800, while operations with more than $100,000 increased by 400. The size of a Nebraska farm increased by 6 acres to 972 acres on average. At this week's expo here in Omaha, companies showcased the latest products and technologies. Gaining prominence in the last few years, online auctions can help farmers and ranchers sell land, animals, and equipment. We talked with Tom Landmesser from Big Iron about the emergence, hurdles, and future of these worldwide sites.
Computer use on the farm has been talked about a lot. And Big Iron emerged 3 years ago in February of '09. And was one of the first in Nebraska. There's several online auctions available today. And part of that emergence is definitely due to the availability and the acceptance of the computer. I've actually said the online auction is the first real tool I've seen that makes the computer really valuable to today's ag producer.
So what's the process people go through when they contact you or any online auction site? What do they do to get their land, to get their cattle, to get their machinery online?
Well, Big Iron, of course, focuses almost exclusively on ag equipment. We do some construction and others. Now, again, there's several venues in the market. There's Superior Livestock is focused in on livestock, excellent way to buy livestock. We're going to see more and more opportunities this way. You know, the auction method is just a great way to bring buyers and sellers together in a free market environment. It's one of the last free markets available.
Are they live auctions, or is it pictures online that anyone can see across the country?
Again,
what's the process?
Our audience is internet wide, so wherever the internet goes, our items can be picked up, and that's the strength of an internet-based auction for today's producer. He can either find equipment worldwide or buy equipment or sell equipment essentially worldwide, and that big footprint, that big audience has tremendous value today.
What are the hurdles in doing so?
You know, I think the biggest hurdle, one is there's still an audience out there that doesn't use a computer. And so you're missing some of those people. There's a certain fear in how do you buy a piece of equipment that's setting in northeast Iowa when you're in southwest Nebraska? That's a little scary. And so the quality of the auction better take care of that to keep that fear factor out, I guess.
In some cases, is that just a personal fear that some people may not get over?
Well, yes, and there's sometimes equipment maybe isn't represented as forthright as it should be. And again, you got to deal with a company that has got a mentality that we want a very open and honest representation of the equipment.
What do you see in the future? Is there another avenue or another angle that auctions or online sites can go to?
You know, I started this about 2.5 years ago working for Big Iron, and I kind of find it funny because my neighbors said, well, you're going to run out of equipment. You guys are listening, so, you know, and I don't see that. And I also see a broader use of the internet and additional resources brought into it to make it more user-friendly, easier to use. You know, there's some limits to the internet today. Of course, mobile devices, the iPads, the mobile, you know, right now you can attend an auction on the internet from almost anywhere, from your combine, from your planter, from your office, and be a successful bidder. And that's just going to expand. And the ease of doing that is going to expand.
If you stop by our booth here at the Triumph of Ag, you saw our latest technological innovation, the Market Journal mobile app. In the coming weeks, we'll show you how you can take us with you on your iPads and smartphones. This week, the USDA and the American Legion signed a memorandum of understanding to work together in promoting opportunities to veterans. Without spending additional money, the focus will be on informing veterans on job openings within the USDA and about programs designed to help them start farms or businesses. Of the current military recruiting force, about 38% list their homes in rural America. Preventing nitrogen loss from Nebraska fields can be a difficult task. However, University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension soil scientist Charles Shapiro says farmers will face problems if nitrogen loss isn't managed correctly.
There are two problems with losing nitrogen. One is, of course, the economics. If you are buying fertilizer and it's not getting into the crop, you have a loss. And then if we lose it to the environment, there's environmental consequences, either contaminating the groundwater if it leaches or adding nitrous oxide or ammonium to the atmosphere.
Shapiro says the best way to minimize nitrogen loss is by knowing weather patterns. Because this may be an impossible task in Nebraska, Shapiro says there is no best strategy, and farmers shouldn't rely on the same strategy for all of their corn acres. Global reserves of soybeans are shrinking the most in 16 years, according to Bloomberg News. Citing a demand for food, feed, and fuel, Bloomberg's story says inventories on October 1st will be 20% lower than a year ago. In a report earlier this month, the USDA said slow export sales in January should be offset in the second half of the marketing year with lower numbers in South America. In the March Nebraska Farmer, you can read how Tom Snyder Jr. has taken another step to increase nitrogen efficiency on his farm. Last year, he installed light reflectance sensors on his cultivators that measure nitrogen content of corn while he drives down the field. Snyder then used that data to variably apply nitrogen in the same trip. You can read more about Snyder's process and light reflectance sensors in the March, Nebraska Farmer. Farm fires are often difficult to extinguish because it takes fire departments longer to respond to rural areas. Farmers are encouraged to have multiple fire extinguishers around their farms and with them in their machinery. When selecting a fire extinguisher, it's essential to select a quality product, according to firefighter and owner of AKE Safety Equipment, Alan Kronbusch.
First of all, you should not buy a fire extinguisher unless it's a multi-class, multi-purpose fire extinguisher. There's three classes of fire. You've got Class A, which is commonly thought of as stuff that leaves behind an ash, wood, paper, rubber, things like that. Class B, you got your flammable liquids and gases. And Class C is anything that involves electricity. I oftentimes will ask people, well, what do you think the most common fire is? And people guess whatever it is that they guess, and it's kind of a trick question because you have to assume that it's going to be all three. So your fire extinguisher needs to be capable of putting out all three, and some are and some aren't.
Kronbusch says if you have a classic powder fire extinguisher, it should be shaken every month to dislodge any solidified powder on the bottom. Extinguishers should also be serviced or replaced every year. Since 1988, Nebraska farmers and ranchers have had access to grant dollars to aid in sustainable ag practices. This money, which is provided by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, is part of the SARE program. Market Journal's Kurtis has the story.
For over 20 years, the USDA's Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program has been promoting and advancing sustainable agricultural systems. The goal of the program, which is also known as SARE, is to develop agriculture that will be around for generations to come. Gary Lessowing is a University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension educator and is also the SARE coordinator for Nebraska. Lessowing says there are three main factors to consider in sustainable ag systems.
It has to be sustainably economically, has to be sustainably environmentally, and has to be sustainably socially acceptable. So these three premises are what they base it on.
There are 4 SARE regions in the United States. Nebraska falls in the North Central region. In each of these regions, grants made possible by the USDA are distributed to individuals and organizations.
We have farmer-rancher grants that farmers can apply for and to do different projects, sustainable type of projects. We have research and education grants that like the University of Nebraska would apply for, and they maybe work with other institutions and farmers. And then also there's graduate student grants and professional development grants where this is where we have programs where we provide opportunities and education for ag educators, specifically extension educators, but also for other people and that are doing ag education, maybe the community colleges or even VOAG teachers. We try to help them out.
Once grant recipients complete their research projects, their findings will hopefully contribute to the advancement of sustainable ag practices. In addition to the grant program, SARE also produces many useful ag publications.
Some of them are free, some of them download off the web. Some of them you can purchase as well. I mean, the cover crop one is kind of, some people call it the Bible of cover crops. Cover crops is a big issue in crop production now, for all types of crop farming. And it's an excellent publication. People can use that, and there's an excellent soils book there as well. So there's a number of different publications available that people can use.
The publications produced by SARE, in addition to former grant recipient research projects, are available online on the SARE website, which can be found at sare.org. At this website, farmers and ranchers can also learn more about the grant programs and the application process.
Nebraska over the years has been very successful getting a number of grants both in research, education, and sustainable ag farmer grants.
Individual farmers or ranchers could receive $7,500 in SARE grants. 2 farmers could also partner on a project and receive $15,000 in grant money. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Kurtis Harms.
Thanks, Kurtis. To view the application and deadlines, visit SARE online at sare.org. And as we talk about sustainability, at a recent United Soybean Board meeting, sustainability was an area of discussion. A director of the United Soybean Board, Mike Thede from Palmer, serves on the task force to address the demand for sustainable soybeans.
we all know, U.S. soybeans are probably the most sustainable in the world, but we're trying to work through some issues to help us prove and certify to them that they are, because they're being asked for that by their customers. It stems from South American beans, tearing down rainforests to plant beans, and so we know that's not an issue in the United States, but it has to do with fertilizer applications and not tearing up new lands, and even some of the stuff that gets into it has to do with labor force and that you're not violating like child labor laws and stuff like that. So it gets very complicated, but U.S. soybeans, I know, are going to fully sustainable. So, and as we all know, they should be termed that. So I think we won't have any issues. We just have to work through some of how we're going to document that.
And in a few weeks, Market Journal will report from Seattle as we take part in the See for Yourself tour with the Nebraska Soybean Board. This trip is designed to show soybean farmers how checkoff dollars help build soybean demand and increase profitability. Rain provided some relief to the driest areas of the state this week. Now to forecast the next 7 days, here's UNL Extension statewide climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here we are again on Friday morning. Of course, last week we talked about the potential for a storm system moving out of the central Rockies and giving us several shots of moisture during the early part of the week. In reality, the models really had this storm system wrong in regards to pieces of energy coming out on several consecutive days. And in fact, what we ended up seeing was a storm come out as a singular entity and developed a very impressive precipitation outbreak across the northern plains in the form of heavy snow and blizzard-like conditions. Further to the south, of course, we've seen severe thunderstorms erupt here in Nebraska, and for the first time in recorded history, we did note that there was 2 tornado touchdowns in the month of February. Now, we're not saying that tornadoes haven't occurred in February. This is just the first time in the last 50 years of data set that we have available that we have reports of tornadoes that occurred during the month of February with visual sightings. We have had several instances where we've had early March tornadic activity. The most notable, of course, was during the 1990 spring, where we had the first couple days of March with some significant severe weather outbreaks. So it's not unusual to get this type of severe weather this early. The question is this an indication that we're moving into a spring regime? And the other question we need to answer is, what is the impacts of this overall snow across the Dakota, since this was really the first significant event in a widespread nature across the region. Now, we had up to 2 inches of liquid equivalent moisture with this snow, and we do have some frost still on the ground, so I think we're going to see some portion of this primarily being a runoff component. I don't know as we're going to see a lot of it go into an infiltration component. So as we go forward, we're going to be looking for that frost to come out of the ground and see if we have repeat events on the same region to try to eliminate these accumulated deficits. Although we shrunk them a little bit, the deficits from October are still there, and there's something that we need to consider as we go forward, since we do expect about 5 inches of moisture in this region over the next 45 to 60-day period. So let's take a look at the upper air models and see if we have any more moisture in store for the Upper Plains region and Nebraska in particular. And as we go to the upper air maps, the one thing I'll draw your attention to is the cool conditions that we've seen with the energy that moved across the state during yesterday that dropped some lighter snowfall totals across northern Kansas, and some flurry activity across southeast and south central Nebraska has moved to our east, and we're getting a reinforcing shot of cold air into our region. So our highs are going to be mainly confined into the mid-30s across the northwest and north central portion of the state. And then as we get to southeast Nebraska, where the cold air tends not to be as influenced on our temperatures, we'll be looking at highs that'll be primarily in the low 40s. Now, as we go to tomorrow, what we're going to notice is there's going to be a little bit more energy in this northwest flow, and that may actually give us a lot of cloud cover, and that may hold our temperatures down somewhat. So we'll be looking at highs in the low 40s across the northeast. But as we get to the southwest, where this ridge is starting to build back in, we're looking at highs that will primarily be in the upper 40s. Now, as we get into Sunday, what we're going to notice is that whole troughing system moves into the eastern United States, and we should see some significant weather all along the eastern seaboard. But we'll start to see this ridging pattern come in, and we're going to see some exceptionally warm temperatures. We're looking at highs at least in the mid-50s across the southwest. As we get closer to northeast Nebraska, where you're close to the jet core, we'll be looking at highs that will primarily be in the mid-40s. Now, as we get into Monday, now we start to see the ridge building into our region. Beautiful weather on store. We'll be looking at highs in the mid-50s across the northeast to the upper 60s across the southwest, and we may even paint a few low 70s. And the same thing on Tuesday, except we'll see some of the warmer air moving into northeastern Nebraska. So we'll be looking at highs in the low 60s north to the upper 60s across the south with a few 70s possible. Now, as we get into Wednesday, another trough will start to make its way into the region, so some colder air filters into northwest Nebraska. We'll be looking at highs in the low 40s. In the southeast, where we're ahead of the cold front, highs in the upper 50s. And as we go into Thursday, we will see generally a warming trend building back in, highs in the upper 40s to the low 60s. And as we go the 8 to 14-day forecast, above normal temperatures. In terms of precipitation, no significant weather on store.
Thanks, Al. And as we close out Market Journal from the Triumph of Ag here in Omaha, we take a look at what's impacting agriculture locally and around the world through the Market Journal Twitter feed. The Farm Journal lists the 5 states that have produced at least $5 billion worth of corn in 2011. This information comes from a USDA report, which has Iowa at the top of the list with $14.5 billion in corn sales. Illinois second on the list with $12.3 billion. Nebraska comes in third with $9.4 billion. Minnesota and Indiana finish off the list at 4th and 5th. The USDA unveiled the Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food Compass on Wednesday. Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack and Agriculture Deputy Secretary Kathleen Merrigan released the compass, which is designed to highlight USDA support for local and regional food products and successful producer case studies. This is an interactive web-based resource which can be found online at usda.gov/knowyourfarmer. Beef Magazine reports on a new reproductive test that detects a protein in bull semen, which will help identify superior fertile bulls. The protein is called the Fertility-Associated Antigen, or FAA. Bulls that test positive for FAA are 16 to 19% more fertile than those who tested negative. Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also find Market Journal segments and information on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Next week, Mike Briggs will be our marketing analyst and will report on ethanol use in Nebraska vehicles. Until then, I'm Jeff Wilkerson. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Animal agriculture is vital to Nebraska. Livestock production not only contributes to our food supply, but also helps our rural communities. Livestock provides revenue for schools, creates jobs, supports Main Street, and enhances the future for farm families. The Nebraska Soybean Board's Animal Agriculture Initiative works to encourage growth of responsible livestock enterprises to benefit agriculture and Nebraska.